The best podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidel minicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Punctuation is not mean. Full stop.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Have you checked out the Heidel shop? It's got lots of cool stuff. And as school approaches, children are going to need things, cool things, fun things to wear. And the Heidel shop would be a great place to look for those things. Backpacks, water bottles, all kinds of stuff. Heidelblog.net/SHOP. Punctuation is not mean-spirited. Full stop. This is number 7 in our Grammar Guerrilla series. According to a number of media stories, the original story appeared in the UK Telegraph. This is back in 2020. Generation Z, those born between 1995 and 2015. By the way, when did generations come to only encompass 10 years? I have had this feeling that people are speeding up generations because I think it used to be 40 years and then it was 20 years and now it's 10 years. So I don't understand how that works. Maybe people who study this stuff are changing the rules so that they can find more work. I don't know how that works. But the baby boomer generation was I guess that was 20 years, 45 to 65, right? Something like that. Or 45 to 64. I just made it. Anyway, so it used to be at least 20 years. But I think at some point we thought they were 40 years. But whatever the case, apparently now, if you were born between 95 and 2015, you are Gen Z. And according to a story in the UK Telegraph from 2020, Gen Z folks find certain punctuation marks threatening. And the argument was that the use of the period, which is called the full stop in the UK, in text messages and presumably in other forms of communication like DMs and the like, is redundant. That the act of hitting send signals the end of a thought. And so if you use a period, then it's interpreted to mean this is the end of discussion. I will hear no more. So it's taken as a power move and not just as a grammatical convention. A Cambridge University linguist, the story seems to be centered in the UK and Europe, has actually studied this and reached a considered conclusion. One of the themes that has emerged in a number of different topics on the Heidel blog and in the Heidelcast is the relation between fixity and change. And this touches on the late modern renewal of nominalism. Nominalism was a movement in the medieval period, particularly in the late medieval period, so you're thinking about the 14th and 15th centuries, in which the relation between names and things was said to be arbitrary. And if that sounds familiar, well, it is. We've been living in a renewal of nominalism for probably, 2025? 30 years or more than 30 years. I know that when I went back to university in 1993 to do doctoral work, I was surprised to find that the world had changed in academia from modernity, which is sort of the intellectual phase we were in when I was an undergraduate, and even as far as I knew when I was a seminary student. I think actually things were changing while I was in seminary, but we were arming ourselves to fight the old-fashioned liberals. And we weren't really much prepared to deal with postmodernism. But be that as it may, things had changed, and postmodernism, deconstructionism had brought with it radical nominalism and radical subjectivism. And in that sort of a situation, grammar is said to be, or can be said to be, utterly fluid, and the meaning of words is fluid. Nothing is ever fixed. And when you claim that there's a nature to things, well, that's not taken to be a statement about objective reality because, of course, everybody knows under postmodernism, there is no such thing as objective reality. And so when you say there's a nature to things and certain things are fixed, well, that's just a way to assert power and control. And so this becomes a huge problem, right? If nothing is fixed and words mean what we say they mean, then, for example, this is a discussion I've had a lot more than I ever expected I would have about the definition of the word reformed. And my Baptist friends, or some of them anyway, and by the way, some of them agree with me, but some of them say to me, well, the word reformed, the adjective reformed, the qualifier reformed means what we say it means. And they clothe it with bromide. Well, the meaning of words changes, and what that really means in the way that they use it, because, of course, everybody knows the meaning of words change. But when you have a substantial body of people continuing to use it in the way it's been used for 500 years, and another group says the meaning of words change and it means whatever we say it means, they are functionally postmodern. They are functionally subjectivist. So, I mean, this is not a problem that's out there. It's a problem that's in here, if you will.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
As I've noted frequently on the podcast and on the Heidel blog and in Recovering the Reformed Confession, we live in what scholars have called an age of liquidity, where everything, as I said, seems to be in flux, where nothing is fixed. And this is one of the characteristics of late modernity, as distinct from earlier phases of modernity. So when I went to university, we lived in, as I say, a capital M modern world. And so there was no serious debate about whether there was such a thing as objective reality. The debate was who's right about objective reality. And the modernists said that we are confident about the things we know with our senses, and they were the empiricists. And then there were the rationalists who said we are confident about those things that we can know comprehensively with our intellect. And then there were some people who were subjectivist, but nobody was really paying them very much attention at the time. And so the debate was, in a sense, between those of us who said, well, there are transcendent, objective truths that are grounded in divine revelation and particularly special revelation, but revealed to a certain degree in nature. And the modernists looked at us and said, well, yes, I know people used to believe that, but we're enlightened now, we're mature, we know how the world works, and it doesn't include claims about miracles and the supernatural and all of that. But we were all arguing about what is objectively true. And there was this sort of leitmotif where they would sort of allow subjective appeals. As long as you weren't claiming, when I was in school, that Christianity was objectively true, if you simply said it was true for me, it was a subjective truth, they would let you get away with that. They wouldn't take you seriously, but they would sort of let you get away with it. And that's why, for example, I remember having a conversation with a philosophy professor who said that he didn't have any time for people like me who believed in Christianity that was objectively true, but he didn't mind the Bardians because, in effect, they made everything a matter of subjective experience, and he didn't really care about that. What he was interested in contesting was objective reality. And as I say, by the time I got to doctoral work in the UK in 1993, the whole world had changed, and we had plunged off the cliff into radical subjectivism and into deconstructionism, so that any claim to objective truth was said to be a construct that was subject to being deconstructed. A construct is just a fancy way of saying made up. It's not really true. There is no such thing as real truth. So that's what I mean when I talk about an age of liquidity, where everything is in flux. If you've ever wondered, how did everything get so crazy? Well, this is one of the reasons why everything is so crazy. And that's why you can have people in their 70s, 60s and 70s, maybe even in their 50s, who look at people who are in their 20s and 30s, and to some degree maybe 40s, but probably 20s and early 30s. And when you have people in their 60s and 70s trying to talk to people in their 20s and 30s, they have a real difficult time communicating because people in their 20s and 30s are assuming that everything is subjective and fluid. There's no such thing as objective truth. And people in their 60s and 70s were raised in a world where there was still an idea of objective truth. So just in case you wonder why things are to a certain degree the way they are, well, there's a partial explanation. So if the Generation Z resistance to, for example, in grammar, the period or the full stop is a real phenomenon, then, and it seems to be, by the way, if you've texted with young people, we don't capitalize anymore, we don't use punctuation. So whether that's, intentional for the reasons that the linguist described 5 years ago, I don't know, or whether it's just laziness or what's going on, I don't know. But at any rate, if that resistance to punctuation is a real thing, then I say that, is one of the signals of the collapse of modernity. And before you write to me to say, read James Barr, yes, I've read Barr. And I know language changes and the meanings of words change. For example, the classic example that I was taught is nice, which is a word that interests me. And I've been trying to write on niceness for a number of years. I'm getting closer to being able to pull things together, but at any rate, that's a project that needs to be done. So I'm well aware that the meaning of nice has changed. Our English word nice comes from the Latin word nescius, which means stupid. And most of the time when people use the word nice, they don't mean stupid. They mean pleasant. They can mean a variety of things. Actually, one of the reasons why I've struggled to write about this is the word nice has so many meanings, and it can be hard to nail down. And a lot of it depends on tone of voice. So if somebody says, well, that's nice, well, they don't actually mean that it's nice. They mean that that's unpleasant. They're being ironic. But at any rate, the word nice doesn't typically mean stupid. If you say, that is a really nice house, you're not saying that is a really stupid house. You mean that that's a pleasant house. It's pretty. It's well made. It's attractive or something like that. So yes, the meaning of words does change. And of course, that's particularly true with slang. When I was young, we used the word bad to mean good. And then at a certain point, the word sick meant good. And obviously, if you keep track of slang, and sometimes I do, and I was just watching or listening to something recently talking about contemporary slang, and kids, of course, are doing the same thing today that we were doing when I was kids, redefining words. And some of those stick and some of them don't. I think, for example, the word cool still sort of functions, and that's lasted quite a while. But a lot of the slang that kids were using in the 60s has faded. Nobody's really using it that way. So it's quite transitory, usually. But still, language changes. And everybody recognizes that. But just bear with me for a minute, and I'll try to explain why language and grammar cannot be utterly fluid, and thus why punctuation is necessary, because it is grounded, given certain things, in the nature of things. It's not completely arbitrary.
Call or text now, 760-618-1563.
So in the beginning of this podcast, I used the word mean in a relatively modern and informal sense. In older usage, the word mean signaled something that was common, which was, at least when I was in the UK, still the way it was used. Common, vulgar, low. And that usage was probably derived from mathematics, where it signals the average. It can also signal the sense of intend. We use it that way frequently, as in what I mean to say is that punctuation is necessary. And I used it in the sense, however, of emotionally hurtful. Nevertheless, in the nature of things, the significance of words cannot be endlessly fluid, or communication becomes impossible. And as you can see, just by looking out your window, social chaos ensues. But consider the significance of the words racism and anti-racism. There are two quite different definitions being used simultaneously, And people are not always aware that the word racism is being used in two different senses at the same time. The older usage, the sort of dictionary definition of racism, signaled something like to disparage someone on the basis of their membership in an ethnic group, or to show prejudice against someone because of their membership in an ethnic group. And this is what Dr. King in the original civil rights movement was attacking in the 1950s and 60s. It was against this that he spoke when he said that we are to judge someone not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the basis of the content of their character. The late modern social justice definition of racism intends to use the word much more broadly. It refers to just about any kind of injustice, whether it has anything to do with ethnicity or not. So when Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo speak of anti-racism, what they really mean is anyone who disagrees with them is racist. And that person stands, in their view, convicted of defending the utterly corrupt, unjust status quo. But baby boomers, that is those born between, as I say, 1944, 1964, 1963, or however it works, and Generation Xers, then I guess born 64 to 84, tend to assume the older definition, and millennials and Zoomers tend to assume the redefinition. But has the word racism really evolved in its meaning? Well, certainly the redefinition is not universally understood or accepted. I don't accept it, and I don't think a lot of other people do either. In fact, the redefinition is nonsense. If one means to say injustice, well, there are words for that, one of which is injustice, and the other is inequity. The confusion over the definition of the word racism and its correlate, the apparent growing fear of punctuation, is grounded in the late modern loss of confidence in the very existence of nature as a category. And this is relevant to Christians too, because there are a lot of Christians who really don't have nature as a category. Grace has, for a variety of reasons, wiped out nature in their view. So when they talk about creation, the only thing they can think about is the length of the creation days. They don't have a place for creation as a category. And you may be listening to this and thinking, well, I don't even know what he's talking about. Well, if that's the case, that would really be another series of podcasts, and maybe I'll do that. But go to the resource page, heidelblog.net/resources, and look at the resources on nature and grace, and that will get you started. Well, millennials and Zoomers have been taught in school that there is no such thing as nature, and that means there are no fixed things. And when I have conversations with particularly millennials and Zoomers, one of the things I say to them is, look, there are fixed things in the world. On our campus, we have a clock tower, and we're theoretically, it's a thought experiment, don't do this, but we're somebody to climb to the top of the clock tower and launch themselves off. Whatever they said about themselves, I remember seeing someone on a YouTube video, identifying as a squirrel. And you can identify as a squirrel, but if you climb to the top of a clock tower and you launch yourself off because you think you're a squirrel, well, you're not a squirrel. And certain things are going to happen necessarily in the nature of things, right? Because you're a human being and you have a nature. And gravity is a thing, and it has a nature. This is the way God has set up the world, and the world operates the way he intends it to operate. And you can call yourself, if you're a male, biological male, you can call yourself a female, but you're not a female. You can dress like a female. You can insist that people speak to you like a female, but you're still a biological male. And that's because nature is a thing. And language changes, but language doesn't change reality. The only being who can change reality with language is God. Right? He speaks into nothing and makes all that is. His word is powerful. His word is omnipotent. His word is sovereign. But human beings don't have that power. We are mere creatures. So there is, in the nature of things, fixity. So not everything is a social convention, but a lot of young people have been taught that everything is a social convention or a construction, and hence deconstructionist. And that's why the deconstructionists have raged for 40 years or more. Sexuality, the deconstructionists say, is nothing but a social construction. And of course, some of that is really just a cover for sexual perversion. And that fact has emerged. It hasn't gotten a lot of play in the press, but it has been covered. Go look at an article in a publication entitled The Critic, and it's at thecritic.co.uk. This article is from April 2021 by Daniel Johnson, and the title is Michel Foucault. It's trick. If you're English, it's Michel. So we would say Michael, but Michel Foucault, Foucault, The Prophet of Pederasty. And the subtitle is, if Foucault were alive today, he would most likely face protests, if not prosecution. And the argument is that a good bit of what Foucault, who's one of the progenitors of deconstructionism, was involved in one of the leaders of a movement among French scholars, just called May 1968 movement, that people trace, in a sense, the beginning of deconstructionism to this movement. But what was behind it was a justification for pederasty. And I'm not going to say any more about that or define that for you. You can look that up for yourself. But it wasn't a purely academic movement. It was a self-justifying movement. So you could take a look at that for yourself.
Heidelcast.
But it's because of deconstructionism that people speak about multiple genders rather than two biological sexes. That's because we've transferred or confused a biological category with a grammatical category. In some languages, there are three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And we've begun speaking about genders because genders are relatively arbitrary. Now, there's some argument that they're not really arbitrary, and maybe there's something to that, but it seems to me, in some languages, a ship is in the feminine, and something else will be in the masculine, and that seems to me to be relatively arbitrary. Well, people have taken these relatively arbitrary categories, gender, and applied them to humans. And that's why on Facebook, at least, I don't know if it still is, I don't use Facebook if I can help it. Don't follow me. I don't want to do anything with anybody on Facebook. If you want to connect with me on social media, the only place where I am accessible on social media is X, formerly known as Twitter. But the best place to connect with me is at the Heidelblog, heidelblog.net. Anyway, the reason that Meta or Facebook lists 20-some genders or 50-some genders, if they still do that, they were doing that once upon a time. And the only reason that government forms list multiple genders is because of this confusion, and this confusion is grounded in deconstructionism, the idea that sexuality is nothing but a social construct. If everything is a convention, if nothing is grounded in the nature of things, if there's no such thing as the nature of things, then, of course, life is reduced to a struggle for power. And if that sounds like Marxism, well, you're exactly right. That's what it is. It is a version of Marxism. So this is why relatively prosperous suburban young people have been in the streets off and on for the last 5 years, burning down less prosperous urban neighborhoods in Minneapolis, Portland, and Kenosha, and different places, Seattle, of course. And this is why at some of the most prestigious universities in North America, young people were raging at a faculty member for daring to suggest that they, the students, be a little more inclusive about Halloween costumes. This is from 2017. Just listen to this for a minute or two.
You're doing. You strip people of their humanity. It is not the same as not playing an instrument.
No, I'm making an analogy.
It's wrong.
It's an analogy between...
It's wrong. You expect us to stand here and listen to your experience of becoming a master, and you can't even listen to anyone telling you that you have caused them pain. You expect us to listen?
How am I not listening to you?
Are you just interrupting? Okay. Lisa left because she was bawling because you couldn't say sorry. Imani is standing here in front of you. Do you even know who she is?
I've apologized for causing pain. I was looking for the right words.
Guys, you have created space for violence.
I disagree.
Okay, so go look at this video. If you've not seen this, it's amazing. It's easy to find. In fact, it's linked on the Heidelblog, actually. A place where you can see it linked is Grammar Guerrilla, punctuation is not mean-spirited, full stop. And we've got it linked there and it's entitled Shrieking Yale Undergrad. This was a confrontation that occurred on the campus of Yale University, one of the nation's most elite, most expensive, most influential educational institutions. And these are some of the most pampered, prosperous for the most part, blessed, if you will, in certain respects, undergrads in the United States. I went to a land-grant university, just by contrast. I worked my way through school in a sort of relatively mediocre university in some respects. I had some really good profs, and it's a better school than people sometimes think. But it wasn't Yale, it wasn't Harvard, it wasn't Princeton, it wasn't Oxford, it wasn't Cambridge or any of those. And and it wasn't very expensive. It's a taxpayer-supported university, and I had to work my way through pretty much for 4 of the 5 years it took me to complete my undergrad. I had to work. These kids aren't working. These kids are on scholarship. These kids are very privileged. And remember, they are outraged because he asked people not to get upset. Right? This is the sort of a dorm, he's called the master. You can imagine how that went over. That's an old title at Yale. This is a sort of glorified, in a sense, maybe resident assistant or something like that. Anyway, all he did, he sent out an email saying, let's not have a big controversy about Halloween costumes this year. And that was the result of that sort of confrontation.
The best podcast, the Hidlecast.
That email and the discussion, or lack thereof, that ensued, according to one of the undergrads there, stripped them of their humanity. Well, why does she think that? Well, because he's talking about what he regards as objective reality, and she's talking about power, right? She sees him as trying to exercise power, and that exercise, or any exercise of power, despite the fact that the group that's surrounding this, Yale University master is actually exercising power over him, which they don't recognize at all. They are horrified and angry and, as I say, shrieking because they see him as trying to exercise power. Well, this is what happens when Marxism does what it does. A little leaven leavens the whole bunch. Everything gets reduced to competing attempts to exercise power. The students perceive that unjust authorities are attempting to impose an unjust system, which is merely a series of conventions, essentially a conspiracy upon them. Have you ever wondered why people are so given now to conspiracy theories? And they are. And, I understand some of the conspiracy theories turned out to be true. I understand that. But we still have to think about why, even before COVID, people were so unexpectedly persuaded by or attracted to conspiracy theories. They can't believe that there are no actual limits to their choices. And when limits are imposed, they are rejected as an unjust exercise of power. You see this frequently when people whom we can see on video are committing crimes, and then when the police attempt to detain them and take them into custody, they scream like banshees because they can't believe that somebody is putting limits on their autonomy, because everything is a convention. There's no objective reality, right up until the time the police officer says, taser, 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 and then suddenly there is objective reality. So grammar is rooted in the nature of things, and so is punctuation. Yes, it's true that there have been cultures that didn't use the sort of punctuation that we use now. For example, ancient Greek manuscripts used capital letters without spacing, but there were signals to help the reader interpret the text. Punctuation developed as a way for the writer to communicate his intent to the reader. And I use his generically because his and her is just too clunky, and I'm not going to do it. Indeed, the Gen Z Zoomer, who is hurt by periods or full stops in text messages, believes in the necessity of some signals of authorial intent, one of which is the message ends. It's only that he's substituted the send function for periods, and he's arbitrarily assigned a malevolent or authoritarian intent to the period or the full stop. So when we write, we have to use a number of different punctuation marks, and we use periods and commas and em dashes and parentheses, and we do so so that the reader can follow the argument of the writer because they add clarity. And when we do that, we're not trying to hurt anyone's feelings. It's true that punctuation marks, as I'm sort of suggesting, are relatively arbitrary. We could agree that a comma signals the end of a thought, and we could use a period in a list, right? So we don't. We've agreed to do it differently. So that is a kind of convention. That's true. But punctuation itself, the act of embedding a visible signal of authorial intent, is not arbitrary, right? That's grounded in the nature of things, since authorial intent is unavoidable. It's true that hitting send can mean I'm finished with my thought, but in reality, people accidentally hit send for emails and texts regularly. I've done it. I imagine you've done it. I know now we can recall them, but sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. So we use periods and commas and semicolons to aid communication. Hitting send is, in the nature of things, ambiguous, and it's even more ambiguous if there's no punctuation. If I write to you using alternative spellings or alternative punctuation, all manner of ambiguity and confusion arises. And that doesn't help communication between the author and the reader. In fact, if we're not using agreed conventions, right, which are really, as I say, grounded in the nature of things, it hinders communication. I think the whole deconstructionist movement is really nothing but literary vandalism. And it's a move, ultimately, ironically, to gain power by breaking down friendly communication between neighbors and replacing it with the imposition of change by force. There's a genuine movement, I think an intentional movement, to create alienation and to cut off communication in order to gain control and exercise power. But using punctuation is not an attempt to hurt, but it's an attempt to help. It's not mean in any sense of the word. To be clear, it's actually charitable. When I was young and stupid, more stupid than I am now, I was opposed to punctuation, but that wasn't out of principle. I was just being stubborn and ignorant and lazy. And those vices are still at work, but in my view, they've just been clothed with high-sounding theories. Don't fall for it. Nature exists just as surely as nature's creator exists. And neither nature nor nature's creator can be successfully avoided for very long.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.